All right, welcome everybody. I'm going to get started. My name is Reese Fowler, and I've been working on Bitcoin for quite a few years, 2011 to be exact. Just out of curiosity, are most folks pretty knowledgeable about Bitcoin? If you're running a company, you paid for something in Bitcoin, you do Bitcoin mining, who kind of falls in that category? Excellent. And then for folks who are just wanting to, hear what Bitcoin is and get their toe in the water, so to speak, who is in that category? Okay, so we got a pretty good range. That's great. So we have lots of things we're going to go through today. So I'll get started really fast. My co-speaker, Sky, should be coming along here shortly. So she'll join in and also add some good tidbits. She's the expert in regards to cryptography, kind of the higher end stuff. I know about Bitcoin, and I've been, like I said, let me give my background real quick. I got started in Bitcoin back in 2011 when there have been several price spikes in the Bitcoin to US dollar exchange rate. And there was one in June of 2011. And whenever there's a price spike, there's always a bunch of news that is centered around that, which is good for Bitcoin, but also bad because a price spike will inevitably go back down, right? So you get all this great news, hey, Bitcoin is this great new thing, and then everyone's like, oh, it just lost all its value. So it's a kind of roller coaster ride, but at least, getting, I guess, good news is, good or bad news is just good news. So I heard about it, and I had my home computer set up as a Bitcoin miner within a week of hearing about Bitcoin, and started mining and did that for a couple of years. And then I didn't want to invest in the new ASIC processors that were coming out. Instead, I wanted to focus on a different part of Bitcoin. And so I got out of mining and into a startup. And the name of the startup is CoinBeyond, and that's who my co-presenter, Sky, she's also with CoinBeyond. And so we are working to make Bitcoin easy to use in person. So we have a mobile point of sale system that allows merchants to accept Bitcoin. Well, 9:30 sessions are always going to have folks coming in late. So yes, with Bitcoin, I wanted to give some history into how it came to be. Some pretty interesting pieces to that story. So, and I would say that this is probably one of the few audiences where I've actually had the opportunity that you guys have a good chance of knowing what I'm talking about. The Byzantine generals problem. Is this familiar to anyone? Maybe? No? Okay. In mathematics, there's a lot of proofs that remain unanswered for a long time, like decades, or even like really long ones, or like a century. So we know this is true, but we can't prove that it's true, type of thing. Well, computer science has something similar in some ways, and that is one of those is the Byzantine generals problem, and it has to do essentially around security. Using the historical perspective first to explain that, then I'll jump into what that means in relation to computer science. So let's say we have a castle here, some turrets on the sides, and you have the army inside here, and then there's army over here. We'll call it Army A, and army over here is Army B. Okay? A and B, they both want to take the castle. But the challenge is that if A attacks by themselves, they'll be utterly destroyed and routed. And that's the end of the game for them. If B attacks by themselves, same scenario. They're out of order. So what's going to happen is they need to coordinate their attack, right? And this is where the challenge comes up in regards to how does A communicate effectively with B. So let's say they have a rider, a messenger on horseback. that sends a message, attack the castle tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Let's attack at dawn. So Army A has sent the message, and now they're all primed for attacking on the next day. But then the generals over here in Army A start thinking, well, what if the rider, what if he was intercepted by someone at the castle, was shot by an arrow, or what if the horse foundered in a hole or something and throw the rider and he wasn't able to get to his destination to tell the army fast enough. So if Army B doesn't get that message, Army A is attacking by themselves, and that's not a good story for them. So what Army A does is, okay, attack it tomorrow 8 a.m. and send us back a message saying that you got the message, right? And so Army B gets the message and they send a rider back. But now Army B is in the same boat as Army A, right? Because if the message doesn't get back, then Army A would assume the message never got there, and now Army B is attacking by themselves. So go round and round and round, yes? And so security encryption, like if you send an email to somebody, how do you know it arrives, unchanged at the destination, or any packet for that matter? So this is something that was postulated in the 60s, I believe. How do we solve this problem? What's really cool, so the Byzantines' general problem went unanswered all the way up until 2008, when a fellow named Satoshi Nakamoto, which, as some of you know, is a pseudonym. We don't know exactly who that person or persons is. It could be a group of people. But Satoshi Nakamoto wrote a white paper on solving this problem. And what was really cool is that, well, maybe not so cool, but no one really believed him. He was like, yeah, that's a great white paper, and we appreciate the intellectual piece of this, but how is it effective? And so that was 2008. A year later, they come out with the blockchain, Bitcoin, okay? And so it proves that you can have a distributed system that verifies transactions without a central authority, is the gist of it. Which in this case, the model kind of breaks down at that point, but you can imagine Bitcoin miners or observers outside of the battle here. They're all around, and they can observe the rider, and they can communicate to each other, and so they all verify where the rider is and how he has gotten to his destination or not, to the army. It's not that point, it's not such a great example, but it does illustrate kind of the point of it. So that's how Bitcoin came to be. 2009, January 6th, the Genesis block was created. And so from there, the kind of things, everything from there is history. I wish I could throw this up on the screen up here, but I don't have that graphics capability to write that quickly. That'd be fun if I could, though. So, what is a Bitcoin transaction? That's what we're going to start with. And a Bitcoin transaction is, you can essentially equate it to a line in a check register, right? If you have a checkbook and you write a check and to and from and the amount and kind of a little memo section on what it is. So, which is also very similar to TCP/IP packet, right? So you got to, from, we'll say the amount of Bitcoin, and then the memo section is what I'll call that. So that is a Bitcoin transaction. And what you're seeing up here on the screen, actually, if I pull it back up, these are the latest transactions on the blockchain right now. So with those, I can convert this into dollars. And you can see that there's a large number of transactions going from, well, there's $1,500 down to 14 cents. So one of the great things about Bitcoin is how easily it's used, for large amounts. The largest ever transaction that I'm aware of was $80 million transferred from one location to another. and then certainly like even less than a penny can be transferred. The microtransactions have a really, really interesting use case.
Oh, there's the 10,000. 36,000.
36,000, yeah. Yeah, it's pretty amazing to watch this and just like see the things flowing through. But if I go back up here to the top section, so each one of these are blocks. So a block consists of a number of transactions all bundled together. The blocks ideally happen every 10 minutes. And I can get in more to the details of how blocks are formed and the difference in their kind of time that's applied to them. But you can see this is block 408,737. It's got 445 transactions in it for a total of $1.74 million. And then it just goes up. The newest one's here at the top. So 37 will drop off here shortly, and so on and so forth. So, like I was saying, a block is a bundle of transactions. So you got like this first transaction, and a second transaction, and a third transaction, and so on and so forth, until you get the total. And this is where the Bitcoin mining comes in, that those transactions are bundled into a block by different mining pools. Over here it shows you which mining pool actually is able to encode that block onto the blockchain. Bitfury was one there, and then there's F2 pool, Ant pool, BTC pool, BTCC pool. And so, yeah, getting into how the mining works is really, really interesting. Essentially, when a block is ready to get filled with transactions, it has a cryptographic algorithm. And this is where my knowledge is a little weak. This is where Sky can chip in really well, or probably a lot of you in the audience. But anyway, there's a cryptographic hash, that's the word for it. And to get the benefit of like Bitfury, right? They were able to hack that hash for block 737. And so with that, they were able to add all those transactions in there, and there's two ways that the pool gets paid. We'll keep that up. Pool gets paid by, let's see, transaction fees. And the other one is block rewards. So, and these have a relationship between them. Transaction fees, every single transaction can have a fee attached to it. And I'll get more into why someone would want to attach a fee. Right now, most transactions have tiny to no fees attached to them. So at this point in Bitcoin mining, most of the profit made from Bitcoin mining comes from block rewards. And what happens with block rewards is there's a number of Bitcoin associated to a certain block. If you're the one that is able to crack the hash and encode the transactions on that block, you get a number of Bitcoins. At this point, it's 25 Bitcoins, and which is a significant amount of money. Right now, the Bitcoin exchange rate, if I switch over here to Coinbase real quick, is one Bitcoin to $457. So if you're getting 25 Bitcoins, you're talking close to 10 grand. And that's theoretically every 10 minutes. The difference between these two is pretty much non-existent. This one is 20 minutes. But it's supposed to average at 10 minutes between blocks. So with your block rewards and all the transactions that are bundled in that block, you get all of those funds. However, like the the Bitcoin mining pools like Bitfury, it's not a single miner. It's thousands of miners all working together. So you get a very small portion of that total 25 Bitcoin block reward and the transaction fees. Whatever, if it's, and I'm a little out of date with the current hash rate, but let's say your pool is 100 gigahashes per second, and you're doing 1 gigahash, you'll get 1/100th of the rewards. Right? You get your percentage of however much computing power you put into that. And actually, this is a great time to jump into a little background on how the mining pools work. Is anyone familiar with, well, the general term is distributed computing projects. SETI at home was the first, right? And just to get everybody on the same page, essentially what SETI at home, or SETI did, SETI is the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. They have a lot of telescopes, most notably the Arecibo dish in Puerto Rico, and searching the sky for signs of extraterrestrial intelligence. Huge amount of data that they're bringing in and processing. Very, very small budget. The movie Contact certainly encapsulated that quite well. So with limited budget and a huge amount of data, they had to get really creative on how to actually process that data. And so what they did was they decided, well, I have like some friends at home that, if we send them a chunk of the data that we've gathered, they can process it on their home computer and then send it back to us, and we'll say, yes, we found alien life, or no. And so far it's been no. So a distributed computing project. Basically that has blossomed out into a huge amount of projects and I call them pools, but networks, I guess, would be most appropriate. Folding at Home is another one, which is they're working on, what's up, list? Folding at Home is probably the most powerful one, and it is working on looking at protein folding and how that features into medicine and other things like that, like Alzheimer's, things like that. So here is a list of distributed computing projects currently. And all you basically do is you download a piece of software onto whatever computer you have an adequate amount of processing. And these are the inactive projects down here. But if I order this by performance in teraflops, you can see there's, for the Folding at Home, which is the most popular project right now, which was started in 2000 by Stanford University, that we've got 39, can't tell on that if it's 39 comma? Yeah, 39,673 teraflops of distributed computing power working to process those protein folding analysis. So, yeah, distributed computing projects are amazing. I've been around since the 90s. Essentially, that's what Bitcoin mining is. It uses a wide distribution of computers, be it home computers, which there's not so many around that uses GPU processing. They're probably not making anything if they do. ASIC processors, which are dedicated towards breaking the cryptographic hash. There's actually some really interesting projects like, what's it, 21...
.co.
What is it?
21.co.
Is it? 21.co?
Oh, by the way, Folding at Home also utilizes the GPUs off of PS3s and 4s to actually do that.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
what
maybe
probably
why
one
it
of
is
the
so
reasons it's so high.
That's good, yeah. I mean, using unused CPU cycles is fantastic.
Yeah, and that kickstarted, that was like in 2006.
When they started doing that?
Yeah, when they started that.
Smart, yeah.
PS3s.
So you can't see it very well here, but what 21 is doing is their goal is to put micro Bitcoin processors in pretty much everything. If it has electricity and can connect to a network, it can have some. So like in your car, in a lamp, it's going to be, their goal is to have it everywhere, which is going to just take the, what's that word, the hash rate off the charts. And actually, while I'm mentioning hash rate, this is blockchain.info, which has the transactions I was showing earlier, and also an amazing number of charts. So if you're curious to see some of the history of Bitcoin, I can just scroll down really quick and show there's a large number of ways to analyze what's happening on the blockchain. If I scroll back up, here is the hash rate. So let's see, this is within the past year. So it used to be, so it's in gigahashes per second, and it's 400 million gigahashes per second at the moment. That's 1 year's time frame. So May 2015 is back here. It was under 400 million. Now you can see how the computing power has definitely grown a lot. If I change this to all time, right, this is where, let's see, right here, this is where I got in with my GPU processor on my home computer. Pretty much 0 in this range. And it has immensely shot up since then.
And the reason, I came in late, but did you already say the reason why it shot up? Was there a specific correlation between something and why people are jumping in now, or since?
Popularity, like more people hear about, more people want to get actually, making money off of Bitcoin by mining. Lots of other factors. Certainly price is another piece to it. I had mentioned that there are block rewards. And so if I go back to this one here, which is always one of the super interesting ones, this is the Bitcoin price, Bitcoin USD price thing. And so there's, see that little bubble there? That's when I heard about it and got on. It was, I believe it was less than $1 prior to that bump, and it shot up to $32. So a 32-fold increase, huge. This one shot up to about 200. And in general, I've noticed a trend that it's about $1 here, it's got a peak, and then afterwards it settles down to about twice what it was originally before the peak. So about $2, it was in this range for a long time. Then it shot up to 200, and settled down to about 100 here. Shot up to about 1,200, and settled down. It didn't go to 600 actually. It was at $200 to $300 all of 2015. Now for 2014, it's pretty much staying in the $400 to $500 range. It hasn't actually gotten very close to 500, except for in the past week, 2 weeks. So several factors. Bitcoin miners get rewards as they mine blocks, but the rewards change over time, because that's how Bitcoin is released into the system. With US dollars, the Fed prints dollars and gives it to the banks and then distributes it through everybody, right? But with Bitcoin, whatever mining pool gets that block, they get those Bitcoin, and then however they want to use it, they want to send it out to purchase more mining equipment, or buy a latte at the corner store, whatever. However they distribute it, they're the distributors of Bitcoin, new Bitcoin into the system.
So, I got a question.
Yes.
Thinking like an economist here, back to the Fed. You've got the first graph, if you go back, the first graph says this super linear graph saying, you said every 10 minutes there's a block of coins produced. Up top, the first one, top one, all the way to the top.
Oh yes, blocks in
Bitcoin.
circulation.
Who decides that rate of Bitcoin production? Was it set at day one, or can it be modified by some person or persons?
It's a fantastic question, because in January 1st, 2009, before the Genesis block, there were 0 Bitcoins in existence. There is an algorithm that determines a lot of factors of how you mine, how many Bitcoins are in circulation, things like that. That algorithm, or set of algorithms technically, says that the total amount of Bitcoins in existence will never exceed 21 million. And so actually this is also a very good point, before I answer your question fully, is that Bitcoin is really divisible. Right now, it's divisible down to 8 decimal places, with US dollar obviously only at 2. So you can really, really get little pieces of Bitcoin. And that actually can be changed. You can't increase the 21 million factor. I mean, at least the Bitcoin community would be up in arms. That's a huge piece of Bitcoin, is that it's not inflationary, it's deflationary. But you can actually, in the future, I would expect as we hit that 21 million, that will go to 10 decimal places or 12, depending on how things are needed. We just make it more and more divisible. And there's actually names for these things, like a millibit is 1,000th of a Bitcoin, or a Satoshi in honor of the founder. That's the 8th decimal place down. So 21 million Bitcoins will be total in circulation, which makes it naturally deflationary. And the release rate will decline over time. So when I jumped in 2011, each block was worth 50 Bitcoins each. And now it's basically every 4 years that halves. So it was 50, now it's 25. This summer is a huge event in the Bitcoin community. It's halving it again. So that, to answer your question a little bit more, that's pretty exciting for miners, because when it gets halved, usually more scarcity, the value goes up, right? So the 21 million Bitcoin, the total number of Bitcoins released, that event will happen in the year 2144. And so it's, every 4 years it gets halves and halves and halves. And so, the last few decades will be, no one will even notice the Bitcoins are being released at that point. And actually that's the relationship between the transaction fees and blockchain rewards. So, or block rewards, sorry. Right now, miners are making the money off the block rewards, right? Because there's not a need for fees, but as the block rewards essentially disappear over time, then whenever you do a Bitcoin transaction, you'll need to put a fee on there if you want to get it picked up. Which brings me, did I answer your question sufficiently? Okay. There is another chart here that's really informative. Let's see. I missed it. Yeah, here it is. So this is the number of transactions per day. And the problem with the number of transactions per day, right now there's a big battle going on with the Bitcoin, by the way, is open source, right? So the open source community is contributing, essentially trying to change the algorithm to improve Bitcoin, and the current system is almost completely different than the first one that was released in 2009. It's evolved quite a bit. But right now there's a cap on how many transactions per second that can happen. And that's 7 transactions per second, which isn't, if you look at, if everybody in the world was using Bitcoin, that would be a severe bottleneck. And right now we're running into that bottleneck. There was an instance which might have been purposely caused that maxed out that number. So let's say you pay for your coffee with Bitcoin, and you have to have it validated, right? It takes 10 minutes before the merchant knows for sure that they've received your Bitcoin. Which, by the way, that's what CoinBeyond has, and a couple other companies, but we notably have solved the problem. Like, you can pay for your coffee and it instantaneously notifies the merchant, so you don't have to wait 10 minutes for verifications to roll through. But on the side. So typically, you have to wait 10 minutes for a verification for the block to get set. And let's say, in that 7 seconds, there were 10 transactions. Miners are going to pick up the transactions that have fees on them over ones that don't have fees. So if you have made a transaction and you didn't pay a fee, but there were 7 others, in that second that also had paid fees, your transaction will wait until the next block. So it could be delayed. So basically, it's just an incentive, and so that's what's going to happen as more and more transactions happen. As it starts maxing out the number, transaction fees will take over block rewards, or else your transactions won't get processed. Essentially, yeah. So another piece of the puzzle, real quick, for miners. If I go back to the main chart here, is talk a little bit about the algorithm that determines how often blocks are hacked, essentially. That algorithm, very simply, is the total computing power of the entire Bitcoin blockchain network. So the hash rate, which we looked at that number earlier, and you multiply the hash rate by a difficulty multiplier. Just call it .m. And that should equal essentially a 10-minute block. And so what happens is, as the hash rate increases, let me see here. So if I pull this side by side, nah, that wouldn't be. I don't know. Get the window set. Okay, so down here, this is the hash rate, and up here is the difficulty multiplier. So they're pretty much perfectly in sync. The algorithm, what it does, as the hash rate increases, the time to mine a block will decrease. So it'll go from, on average, 10 minutes, probably 3 or 4 days later, maybe down to 9 minutes, a few days later. It keeps getting smaller and smaller if the hash rate is going up. And so what the algorithm does every 2 weeks, it analyzes what the hash rate is, how often blocks are being computed, and are being hacked, I guess. And then it adjusts the difficulty multiplier to reset that to 10 minutes. So every 2 weeks, right, this gets reset so that this is back on target, the 10 minutes. Is that fairly clear how that works? Excellent.
What determines, what system determines the difficulty?
It's an algorithm that's just built into and this is once again where my knowledge is, I'm not as technically proficient as the developers on our team, but they're, yes?
It is a real problem because you're multiplying the hash rate by another number and you come out with time. So something is being inverted there, something is really being inverted.
Right, yeah, the units on the difficulty are, I don't know, whatever, gigahashes over seconds or something. Gigahashes per second over seconds squared.
But the idea is that the product has to be remaining in this range of whatever, 10, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is, if you ask somebody that
exactly
actually...
10, or is it kind of fluctuates a little bit?
It fluctuates a lot. They might overcompensate to do it 12 to hit the average. I'm not exactly sure how that algorithm works, but...
Is the idea that goes down over time, because you said it's tapering off to a maximum number. So
this
will
will be
10 and then go down until it gets to 0. 10 minutes down to 0. But when it reaches the 21.
No, this is the number every 10 minutes that all the transactions are bundled together, put in a block, and then that block is set on the blockchain. And I actually hadn't gone to that, but the blockchain is, if I bring back this section. Here. So this is just the top few blocks of the blockchain. 45 is, actually there's some invalid blocks in there. That's kind of impressive to see. So if it's an invalid block, it is not added to the blockchain. So you got 42, so 43 and 44 are missing from here. But in general, I mean, almost always have seen 42, 41, 40, 39, 38. They're always sequential. That might be notable news that we're seeing, I don't know.
No, on this one it's on my screen it's 40, 43, 44, 45, 46.
Oh, really? Maybe I need to refresh.
By the way, about the difficulty calculation, if you go to bitcoin.it,
Mhm.
the fact gives the details of the formula and how the difficulty is calculated and adjusted. So you could look that up.
I haven't looked at that one, so that's.
Okay, next
Yeah.
question, is that algorithm, is that distributed? Is that built in
Right.
the blockchain, or is that?
So there are Bitcoin nodes, which are, they contain the entire system of Bitcoin. That one actually, I haven't looked at this for a while, but I'm pretty sure usually there's some good graphics associated with Bitcoin nodes, global distro, I think, or this is 21.co, but.
So they're kind of like the tracker sites of.
They're master computers that contain the entire blockchain from the Genesis block forward, along with all the pieces of information. There were 3,000 or 4,000 back when I checked a year ago.
They do all the validation and
They
double checking.
they carry in internet terms, they're more like the big network hubs where everything comes into. So you got your local routers and things like that, but the distribution hubs, like in Seattle, they just serve as a kind of a backbone, essentially, to the Bitcoin network. What happens is, because the entire blockchain is a decent amount of information at this point, most of the miners carry just the most recent blocks and information, not the full range of everything. So kind of deep history, essentially. Oh, actually, 7,000 nodes. Almost. One short. But, yeah. So, with all those pieces of the miners, moving on to kind of the next section of Bitcoin. Unless anyone had mining-related questions or.
I'm a bit confused between.
Sure.
So, I had this concept that miners are often known mining coins. Do they do that separately than mining transactions, calculating the transactions?
So
they calculate the transactions and get coins, and then spend coins. Other people mine those to crack the transaction, and thus getting more coins.
Right. So basically, they're not mining coins. That's maybe just a shortcut way to think about it. They're trying to break the hash on the block and get the rewards, and that's how they get the Bitcoin from there. So you can take out the middle pieces of information and just go from we're mining and it's for coins.
And then when you spend those coins, they end up as transactions.
Right.
That's the cycle.
Got it.
Yeah. Cool.
As far as the release of Bitcoins, what is the whole mechanism of that? I mean, are there hashes associated with the releases, and is that mined?
Pretty technical. It's.
Or is it just going, or the release is just processed by these nodes?
As far as I know, so this will be spotty, but all the Bitcoin, all the blocks are already in existence, and so it's simply there's blocks that have been released to allow transactions to go in them, and then set on the blockchain. But there's a huge number that are just sitting there waiting for it. And so it's just like a factory where, as soon as the last one is encoded, the next one's up, and that's what everybody starts hacking on.
Okay.
So-
Think of it like this way,
Yeah.
there's a bunch of chains, right, in the blockchain, and the miners are trying to do the next one, to make it one deeper.
Right.
And that has all the list of transactions that are pending. So in addition to all those, they put one transaction in there that says, out of thin air, give me 25 points. And then they try to crack the challenge that includes all that, including the out of thin air one.
Okay.
And then they get the answer and they publish it. And if they made up some bullshit entry there that said, out of thin air, give me 26, or give me 1,000,000, nobody else will recognize that block. Or like the difficulty's wrong. They say, hey, I solved the challenge with a really small difficulty. Everyone will yeah, that block's not valid. So it's in their best interest to use the right difficulty and to reward themselves with the right amount of coins, otherwise they won't be recognized.
So that makes sense. When the last block that has the extra 25 coins is done, after that, they just transaction fees.
There's another question. Someone raise their hand. Sir?
All the transactions have to go through some computers in China. Is that true or not?
There's a lot of computers in China working on it, but I don't know the background behind that. I don't know anyone.
The Chinese mining pools are really big.
Yeah.
And they have a quick, easy access to the latest hardware because they also make it in China.
Like AM miners and coal block around
Plus-
Power plants.
Exactly. And
Right.
I think that's what's really driving it is that probably is electricity is damn cheap there.
And that's actually probably the biggest cost is the electricity in Bitcoin mining. And here in Washington State, we have pretty much some of the lowest power cost in the United States. So there's some pretty big mining operations out on the east side, pretty much right nestled up against the dams. Yep. Sir?
But isn't there one other factor though, because for the Chinese miners, a lot of the transactions are occurring in the West, are they not? And so there's a network connectivity bandwidth issue for them to deal with, to get access on those transactions? I mean, because I've been reading some articles where there is some kind of controversy in terms of upgrading to different software systems based on the Chinese resisting that. They say that they'll have to put us at some sort of unfair advantage because we've got this general network bandwidth constriction that we deal with being in the sector of the world that we are relevant to all the transactions.
Interesting. As well, it's like I'm having a very hard time explaining it, but it's like the size of the packet or something. And there's some group that wants to increase it so they can get more transactions through, something like that.
And there's two different proposals at hand. Bitcoin XT is one that wants to really open it up to 100 transactions per second, around there at least. But then that's a huge fork in the system. That one has lost popularity over the past few weeks. So it also,
How about today?
in the Bitcoin miners world, that would be bad because essentially opening it up that much would cut into their profits. So they want a more reasonable level, I guess, from their perspective of, I think around 20, 21-ish. So going from 7 to 20, I think, is where things are at. So either 20 or 100, huge change.
Well, you say this is open source software. With Linux, we have one benevolent dictator that sort of has the ultimate say about
Right.
things that take place in the Linux kernel. Who has the equivalent kind of say about
And that's
blockchain technology?
a huge controversy right now. Bitcoin XT, as I had mentioned, wants to make that change to 100, and their proposal is to move it more to that system, where there would be kind of a person or a small group that are kind of heads of the code that move it along and shepherd it, throughout the world. Right now, there's no one. It's completely distributed. There's, I think, a 95% approval rate for any changes to the code.
they don't submit themselves to any kind of regulatory body of any kind internationally, right? Like, there's no subgroup of the UN or anything that's trying to oversee this or something or anything like that.
Not yet. Hopefully not.
Trying long term.
If possible, could you explain some of the other uses of the blockchain beyond Bitcoin?
That's what I was getting into once we finish up the mining thing. So unless there's other mining questions, jump into that.
Just maybe a quick one. What's the percentage between transaction fees and the block rewards currently about? Do you have a sense of?
Yes.
Like,
so there is. I'm on the network. Oh wait. Let's see. Probably because I changed the zoom on it. Unless I'm off the network now.
Okay, well you can go on.
There's a chart on Bitcoin or blockchain.info that shows fees. And it's pretty uninteresting.
Okay, thank you.
So getting on to the I'm wondering what's happening. Maybe if I disconnect from the network real quick. Getting on to kind of blockchain 2.0 is going back to this transaction piece that I did earlier, the to, the from, the amount, and then the memo section, right? Like a checklist or anyway. In that scenario, I didn't talk about the memo section, but essentially you can put a piece of data on the blockchain. Thank you. So what's really interesting, because blockchain is so divisible, right? We can actually do 0.0000678, right? A Satoshi. We can send somebody a Satoshi, which essentially is no amount of value, right? If we send that amount, but something interesting put here on that transaction, then what we've done is we've sent this out into the world. It gets encoded onto a block and onto the blockchain, and now it's permanent and irrefutable. So what's super interesting about this is, let's say, well, if I get into real quick into selling a house, essentially. So right now, if you want to sell your house, you have to go through a lot of steps. You have to get it bonded. You have to get, and I'm not an expert on this, so someone can correct my language. But you have to get, all the certified pieces of paper. Like if you have the deed to the house, I guess at some point in the past, this is what happened. Someone had their deed, and they went and sold it to somebody, but then they went over here and sold it to somebody else and somebody else. Now they have 3 times their value, and they skip the country, right? So that's why the Notary Public, verifies this is the deed. It's now in the hands of this person. Everything's set and encoded. But there's a lot of people working, doing things. There's a lot of cost, obviously, associated with that process. And if you think about it, if you put the deed on the blockchain, now you can't actually do that twice. You can't double spend. That's one of the brilliant parts of what Bitcoin is you can't spend the same Bitcoin twice. It's impossible. It's like cash. $1 you spend on something, you can't respend that same exact dollar. So putting on deeds to houses. There have been people who have put marriage licenses on the blockchain. Huge amount, like whatever you can possibly imagine. Voting systems, right? Where, and this gets into some really interesting pieces. So if you think real quick, and this is definitely a stretch of of how the actual system works. But we'll say the blockchain is this represented by that circle. And there's a process, a transaction, and you move around the circle. And so, a circular process of transaction, and then I could get into that also, but I'll do frame. But imagine it as this for a second. So there's something called side chains, which if you have a side chain over here, let's say just S1, we'll call it side chain 1, that this is privately owned, right? They're on their own, they have their own blockchain essentially. And let's say that this is for voting, okay? So that it's kept private, it's kept confidential, there's nothing on here, but you get a little piece that the transactions here are verified here on the actual blockchain, right? On the Bitcoin blockchain. So the side chain is able to use the power of the blockchain itself to make sure that everything is valid and accurate, but also adding more information, other power, other things. So like a voting system, if you're going to cast ballots and things like that and not allow double votes or weird other things to happen, this is how that could work. Same thing with escrow. Oh, that's the word, escrow, for houses. It's somewhere tucked away in the brain. There could be another side chain over here, attached though, and it would work in the same way. And you can have side chain off of side chain. When you start doing this, start layering the blockchains, really interesting, really powerful type of stuff. So this is a general idea of how kind of the social contracts work and some of the potential. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so you're using a Satoshi basically, like let's just say a Satoshi just to verify some kind of activity between parties. Like it's not even about the coin anymore, right? Is
Correct.
And you're using the memo
right.
aspect of it.
Yep.
Okay.
Essentially, if it's Bitcoin 1.0, then you're pretty much using sending money to somebody. But if it's Bitcoin 2.0, you're using a memo section, and just you can't send a Bitcoin transaction of 0, but you can send of a micro itty bitty amount.
How much information can we stick in a memo?
It's a good question. I think it's like a meg. Anyone know?
Less.
Is it less?
It's a really small amount. It's like in the kilobytes.
Right.
Is it?
It's like 500 something kilobytes or something like that.
Okay. Half meg.
But that's where the side chains come in.
Yeah.
So you can add capacity off the main chain.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So another interesting piece of Bitcoin, really quick, because we only have a minute left, is that you don't actually own Bitcoin. And this is obviously something that here at LinuxFest we can appreciate more. Let's say there's this long chain of transactions, or not transactions, sorry, of Bitcoin. This is a really oversimplified model. But let's say there's, and I often imagine these as safety deposit boxes, okay? So, this first safety deposit box is holding 3 Bitcoin, actually. It's holding 3 Bitcoin. And so if I were to give you the 3 Bitcoin here, I wouldn't give him those 3 Bitcoin, I would give him the key to unlock that Bitcoin, right? So the transfer of the key from my Bitcoin wallet, right? Like the association is that your Bitcoin wallet holds a bunch of Bitcoin. Really, it doesn't. It holds a bunch of keys to all the Bitcoin that you control at this moment. And you can shift those keys around to other folks. It's a process. What's really cool about this, and this is where the safe deposit box idea comes into play, is that with safe deposit box, you got the bank has one key and you've got the other. Bitcoin, this can work the same. So let's say there's a key to unlock this, but I can split that key up into 3 sub-keys. So let's say it's called multi-signature, and let's say like a nonprofit is using Bitcoin as their monetary base. and they need approval from the 3 people on the board of directors to make any financial transactions. So you can use multi-sig technology so that all 3 of them each have a portion of the key, and they all have to use it at the same time to turn that and send the funds to somebody else. So now you've ensured that there's not someone embezzling or moving funds or things of inappropriate nature. So the multi-sig technology is also very, very cool. Now, something I just want to say to finish things out here is Bitcoin is amazing. However, even larger than Bitcoin is Ethereum. Has anyone heard of Ethereum before? Yes. You start reading about Ethereum and your mind just kind of gets blown. At least mine does. It's not built on transactions of sending money from one person to another. It's more the blockchain realized to completely revolutionize how computing is done in the modern world. So if you want to build Bitcoin, actually, like if this were around back in 2007, you could actually build Bitcoin using Ethereum. Yeah, I won't get into the details because I've run out of time. But if you want to look more into this, I would recommend it because it's hot, and there'll be a lot of things happening with this. Maybe next year we'll get an Ethereum presentation also. Thank you all so much, and have a good day.